Great, okay. So I've been asked to do a presentation today. I'm Martin Well from Quest Software, and I wanted to talk to you today about how to enhance your SQL Server security and auditing requirements while balancing performance overhead and integrating with an SIEM platform. A lot of this is based around the fact that a lot of businesses are being asked to investigate audit requirements because of things like PCI and GDPR, and these needs are very common within most organizations to be able to look at all the data and see who's accessing it and looking for any vulnerabilities that there might be. And the key area really is when it gets pushed down to, you know, where do we keep most of our data, and a lot of that is stored in a database, and then that's just pushed along to a DBA to say come up with some sort of solution for auditing. And a lot of customers as well are using security and event management systems to process event logs and things like that. And again, you could process your Windows event logs and your SQL event logs, but that doesn't really help you with who's accessing the data within the database. So that's what my presentation is around today, is to help you work out where your data is and how you can switch on auditing at a very granular level and integrate that with a system like Splunk, for example. Before we start, I just wanted a little brief introduction about the area of Quest that I work in, the information systems management. You might be familiar with some of our tools which help you manage your SQL and Oracle, ASC and IBM DB2 database types, as well as MySQL and Postgres. We also have Foglight, which is an infrastructure and database monitoring solution for on-prem and cloud. And I will cover that slightly because I'm using that particular functionality when we do implement auditing on SQL Server to allow us to see the impact of that. So we'll see a little bit of that at the end of my presentation. But if you're an Oracle customer, you might also be aware of our SharePlex product, which allows you to replicate changes to the database to other target instances of Oracle, MySQL and Kafka. Very useful for moving your data into the cloud or migrating an Oracle platform, for example. And the area that I'm talking to you about today is around our tools for SQL Server, which is the Apex SQL range of tools, and it's Apex SQL Audit that I'm talking to you about today. And some of you might be aware that we recently acquired Irwin, and that lends itself to my presentation as well. As I did mention about people analysing where they keep their data and understanding data flows and things like that. And you know, if you think about going further upstream with what I'm going to do today, is that something like data governance and data modelling is something that you can look at with Irwin, for example, and the tools that they have in that area. Okay, right, nearly there. A little bit about me. So I've been with Quest at least 20 years now, and I work in the area of database management and performance monitoring and infrastructure monitoring. Yeah, so that's me. Okay, let's start off by talking a little bit about the product then. There's a link there to Apex SQL Audit. It'll audit all database, SQL database instance and security activities, or at least everything that SQL Server allows us to enable to see what's going on within an instance of SQL Server. There's various different techniques. There are different methods of auditing SQL Server, like through trace flags and extended events and native audit. And we utilize whatever is most applicable to the version and edition of SQL Server to do that for you. The key thing really is that if you need to meet your compliance requirements around like GDPR and knowing who has access to the data within your database, that what I'm finding when talking to my customers around this is, and this is the reason for me wanting to talk about this today, is that where auditors are coming in and saying, look, you need to audit this particular database, it's quite a big sort of like sweeping statement, audit your database without any requirements around, well, what will that mean to the performance and the overhead? How much data will that collect? Why are we monitoring every single moving part of the instance when there's only a few tables might have some sensitive data in there? And where do we keep all this data, and is it stored like on the local instance, or how do we then manage that and stop that being tampered with, and and all those sorts of issues around being able to manage this. So that's what I'm trying to help you with today. And we need to provide out of the box and custom reporting and securely store this audit data centrally in a tamper evident repository. This is another aspect of that. If you're going to provide something where you're suggesting to an auditor or to your data governance team that you are monitoring who is accessing the data, the obvious question will be, well, what about you accessing that data, or at least through an account that's got a sysadmin role, and what would there be to stop you then just covering your tracks? So we need something to show that the data that we're collecting is robust enough, and provide customization of the auditing and any alerting that you want out of here. Alerting can be quite useful for when you see some of these things in the news around things getting inside your network and looking around for data and accessing your instances, perhaps unbeknown to you. So not necessarily like an external sort of hack or whatever. So being able to get yourself alerted to that, it could be quite useful to give you that who, what, where, and when, and before and after auditing if required. And we can deploy on failover clusters and manage these auditing on multiple servers from a central point of view. Okay. So I'll just explain a little bit about the architecture. What I'm planning on doing, I haven't really got a great deal of time for you today, but what I'm planning on doing is just showing you a live demo of this shortly. Just explain the architecture. So if I just pull up a laser pointer here. So if this is your monitored server over on the right-hand side, and you obviously have one or more of those, what we would typically suggest is that you provision a central server for the collection of the data that we're going to get from the monitored instances, and we would put an instance of SQL on there as well, and that would give us the what we call the central repository database, CRD database, which is what I mentioned about being tamper evident. So if we tried deleting records in there, it would alert us that it's been tampered with. So that will be the central database that we're going to report from. We have like an audit service which the interface will interact with and the remote collectors will interact with. And when we want to configure an instance to be monitored for audit information, we install a service-side component on there, which is quite useful from the point of view that we're sort of then making sure that all the processes are running and that the data is being sent back to the central service, because there are going to be situations where you're going to have network connectivity problems, or we reboot the audit service and you don't want to then have outages where the database that's being monitored can't forward that data on. So there's some central processes here and some local file storage where we keep that data and then we collect it and send that back to the central server. Then we have a user interface which has user access control. So once implemented, you could just pass this off to an audit team who could then manage that. Although I do feel that this is something that needs to be worked with as more of a collaborative approach, because it is very easy to just sort of create some really horrendous sort of too much auditing and too much performance overhead and too much data. So we need to be wary of that. This is slightly more sort of shows you a more complex environment where we've got a couple of remote servers and we've got a central server here where we're also monitoring as well. It just shows you all the different flows of data there, which is available on our website for Apex SQL. Okay. And then what I've been doing recently with customers, and I thought this is one of the reasons why we picked this particular topic, is then integrating with a system like Splunk, for example, where there's still this sort of requirement to be able to get this granular monitoring, but also integrate that. And we utilize the automated report mechanism. Obviously, Splunk's very good at just reading normal CSV files. So by utilizing that sort of technology, we can just dump data. And I'm going to go through this with you and show you how to set this up so that that system can just ingress that data from the report and also give us that alerting method from there as well. So quite a useful way of implementing that integration. Okay. Right, so I'm going to go through the demonstration with you now, and if I'm not sure how there is a chat box I can see, so if there are any questions, you could always just bung them into the chat, and I'll try and address those, or I can you can send your questions through, and I can pick this up afterwards. But what I'm trying to get out of this for you is helping you understand what do we need to audit, and this is a lot of things that discussions that I've had when I've done POCs with the product is again just pushing back on the auditors to say, well, one of the classic ones that I found is things like we want to audit logins, and it's a reasonable sort of request from their point of view that they want to know who logs into the database and then when they log out, so that they can see who may have had access. And that might work quite well for some systems where you have an end user application, and when you start it up, it attaches you to the database and you log in with your Windows account or whatever, your AD account, and that might be quite handy. And then what I do is we then implement something like this where actually what we find is that this particular instance is connected to by an application server. And the application server is basically every time someone does anything, will instigate a connection like a login, run a query, and then disconnect. And so then what you're seeing is very unhelpful information where you're getting thousands of connections per minute. Just basically, that's how it works. It just connects, runs, disconnects, connects, runs, disconnects. And so forth, it's like, well, we wouldn't be able to really see any useful data with this because we don't actually see who this user is. That is handled by the application. The application might be using some sort of service account, and therefore we then want to say, look, we need to exclude this type of event or exclude this type of account or user or machine in order to cut down that noise. It's not going to help us with any type of auditing. So that's the sort of process I've been going through. And then also addressing the fact that if we audit too much, a lot of businesses that look at this without this tool would then sort of say, well, the overhead's too great, so let's just risk assess the situation and decide that actually no, we're not going to audit it, and that has its risks associated with it. So if we can find some common middle ground, that's useful. And I did mention again about how much data will this generate, because you don't want your audit systems to be bigger than the systems that you're monitoring. You're just generating too much data. But this has particular significance when you're looking to integrate with an SIEM system, if that has got ingress charges associated with it, because then if you are picking up every moving part of the database, then for what reason? Because it's just going to cost you a fortune to process that, particularly like in a cloud service. And that's my fourth point there. Okay, so it's all about getting the balance right, balancing your situation, looking at every single, say, database or instance, and deciding, what is the best approach on a case-by-case basis. So I'm just going to drop out of my slide temporarily, and we'll just bring up my lab for you, and you can see this in action. So this is the application. I'm on my central server. I don't necessarily need to be, and I wanting to monitor one or more remote instances of SQL Server from here. And what you can see the ribbon across the top is split into things like the status, the health, configuring the auditing, configuring the reports, and we're going to look at that when we want to integrate, configuring alerting, and areas here about the central repository. Is it okay? Has it not been tampered with? Are we collecting too much data, or do we want to archive data off? If I click on archive, and I can quickly show you this in Management Studio here, this is the central repository at the bottom here. And you'll see here that that's the database, and if it gets too big, we can archive it, or automatically it will archive like every month, and then we could detach that database and store that offline if need be. But if we leave them there and we create a report that spans multiple, like if that was March and this is like February and January and December, we can create a report going back in time, but then when we want to, we can detach those databases if we need to. Okay, so when we look at the central instance, we can see the how many instances we're monitoring, and the versions, etc. And then when we've added a monitored instance, we see here again the health of that, where it's going to store its temporary folder. That might be important if you if there is a lot of information to trace, to audit, whether there's enough space on that particular folder. And this is the bit that I really focus on with customers, is how many operations have you captured, and then you can just see how much data you're generating by what you're configuring. Okay, and it's reasonably easy to set this up. You go to the configure box and you add a server. Now, you just type the name of the server in. It will detect whether the server-side components are installed. It will either try and remote deploy them, or you can copy your folder across and install the server-side components. You might need to open some firewalls, for example. But once that's configured, you then have a system that then you can decide what it is that you want to audit. And I've got the instance level and I've got the database level. They're very distinctly different. At the instance level, you'll see that I can add various, these are the sorts of list of things that I can audit on this particular instance. Do I want to audit backups and restores? That might be useful to know who's doing backups, if they're backing up your database and restoring it on another instance somewhere. Do I want to audit failed logins and logouts? So all these are typical types of activities which you may or may not want to audit. And again, going back to my point that select all, and then you could see how much activity that's generating. And then you have the option to sort of back that off by filtering, not just on operations, but on the applications that are doing these operations and the logins that are doing these operations. If you're not too familiar with this, you do have the option of running these templates. So you can apply a GDPR template or a PCI template. That will tick all the appropriate boxes. And then, again, as I said, what I've been doing with customers is then saying, right, what applications are accessing this, and do we need them? Like when I'm running in the cloud, you might have some like Azure type activities that you don't want to see. Like here, I'm excluding the Apex SQL Audit product, as I'm not capturing what that does, because I'm I'm deciding that is fine, and I don't need to know that. That's not part of what I'm not letting it audit itself. Here, for example, we've got like a .NET and a Management Studio connection, as you saw. I was logged in down there. So, you know, I could either include or exclude, but also like here, I don't know what that is. I'm just reading something in the chat here. What's the difference between, is it Monitor and Foglight for SQL Server? Well, we don't actually sell Apex SQL Monitor anymore, so it was another monitoring solution. I'll come on to that when we look at the Foglight bit. So if you leave that with me, I'll come back to that in a moment. I wanted to show you here, like, I don't know what that application is. It's a .NET application. So what I might want to do is exclude or include by the user. So this example here, it's where I know that the application, for example, might have its own security and auditing built in, so that service account could be excluded, or implicitly, I just want to know who is accessing this database using this particular account. I just click on the button, I click apply, and bang, that's done. The configuration has been passed to the remote server, and now that is what is being monitored. And you can see the summary on the right-hand side here. The BMF user is now being excluded, for example. Okay, and then moving on from that, we can then go up to the database level and say, what do we want, which databases do we want to monitor, and what do we want to monitor in those databases? And this is where some sort of, you know, like I mentioned with Erwin, is like looking at a modeling tool or a data governance tool, because what most DBAs would be faced with is to say, right, this is the instance that I have. We've got a number of databases. I don't know what these do or what's in them. I don't know where there's sensitive data in here or not. I know that I don't want to monitor access to AdventureWorks, but other than that, I'm not quite sure. So how do we then help you in that particular area? So you may know which database. So here, for example, I can add a database and I can add another database in here, and I can click add, and that's now added into the system. Oh, sorry, I added a MSDB in there as well. Didn't mean to do that. Again, I can just remove that fairly easily. So when we're on this one, we're not monitoring anything yet at all, but you may just want to monitor the queries or the DML or the DDL, for example. You may want to make use of the templates. So we may apply the GDPR template onto that particular database. We can merge them together, and that's what that will be doing for me, okay? But again, I'm still not really getting to any particular detail here, other than the fact that those are the operations. Now, what about the objects? Which objects do I want to monitor? Do I want to include particular objects, or do I want to exclude particular objects? And probably more likely here, we want to include them. But I wanted to draw your attention to this sensitive columns feature, where we can, if we're not sure, we can click on that button there. We can click on the filter, and this has got some predefined filters like postcodes, credit card numbers, IP addresses, things like that. And we can add our own here or import and export them. But that's what it's saying. I can scan through and look for 59 different types of potentially sensitive data, and then we can search through the tables that I've got, and it's come back and said, you know, I mean, you might, for example, want to add employee ID in there, but what it's come back with is the audit table, the employee table, and it's suggesting these are the tables that I should be monitoring, and I can then click apply, and then the job's done. Okay, on the right-hand side, you can see we're going to gather all SQL text, create drops, etc., from those particular tables. Okay. Now, there's one area that I haven't really mentioned here, is that we can also monitor changes to the data, like if I, you know, updated the salary for a particular user, what would that look like? So we have a before and after. I haven't really got time to go into this into a lot of detail. It's called the before and after, other than to say that what it does if I just show you here, is it manages the triggers. So if I go into that particular feature and I say I want to see if people insert, update, or delete the salary column on the employee table, what it's doing is it's just adding some triggers in there so that if I do update the salary, so let me just bump someone's salary up here, and you'll see this in a second when I run a report. I've updated that. I've also selected some data from that particular table. And then this is the next bit of my presentation really, is that how do we see what's going on? You know, when we go back to the status, we know we're running, but let's go to the reports and let's have a quick look. So I'm going to look at everything that could possibly have happened. Now we can only report on what we've captured, but here you could exclude things from various different reports, and we have various different out-of-the-box reports depending on the compliance standard. I'll just do a complete audit trail, everything you've got, but I'll just do it for the last hour. Click OK, click preview, and again, this is the sort of process that I would go through with the customer to see, look, you can see here the IAS agent query service is logging in, logging out, logging in, logging out. You might not want that, for example, and therefore you could exclude that. A couple of pages in, we get to the bit here where you can see the trigger has picked up the change. So there we've got the before and after. So that's something that you need to think about, whether you can handle triggers or not. So if not, then ignore that bit. But you can see here, there's the update statement, and there's the select statement that I ran on that, captured and stored in my central repository, which I could then upload into the SIEM system if needed. I'll just quickly mention here around the alerting. I won't save that report. This is where you could have, I'll just edit one of the existing ones, but you could create a new alert where you filter what sort of things that you want in the email or the event log, and then which servers you want. What it is that you're trying to find is on the first screen here, and then that will allow you to write, for example, an email to the event log, which can be picked up and give you some early alerting for that. But what I've then been doing with this, so this is the example I did with this particular customer, is I created a Splunk report just for my particular instance. And what it's doing, you can see it's been saved to just run every 2 hours, or looking at last 2 hours of data. So if I preview that, that will show me what that has picked up. Okay, and then what I then do is I schedule that, and if I just edit that for you, I've scheduled it to run the Splunk report daily every hour. So the idea with that is that every hour we're going to pick up another chunk of data that we found. So you know, you could run it every hour with just an hour's worth of data, and that will run quite happily. Let me just exit there, and you'll see in my folder, since I set this up, we've got a PDF version of that particular report, and we've also got a CSV file. So that would be extracted. If I just edit that for you, we can see that would have the columns that we need specifically that Splunk's then going to process in the cloud, and then that will do some analysis of that for us. So that's quite a useful way of delivering that side of things. Okay, so that will be running and picking those things up, and then we can alert on that if necessary. So hopefully you can see how easy that is to use, and then you'll also see when we looked at the reports, just how noisy this can be. So by allowing you to quickly keep previewing these things and looking at what sort of data you're getting, and then saying, right, let's go back and let's exclude that particular operation or that particular client host or that particular database or whatever it might be from that processing, therefore to reduce that if it's not really very helpful data. Okay. I think I'm just conscious of time. I think I've covered everything I wanted to with that, so that's good. I'll just wanted to quickly show you this before we go back to the PowerPoint around the overhead. So what we can do here, and this was a question we had around the monitoring, is Quest provide Foglight for SQL Server as well as other platforms like MongoDB and Cassandra and Oracle, for example. We monitor cloud instances. And one of the things that I just wanted to mention with this particular feature is that I think, whereas like SQL Monitor, Apex SQL Monitor is just for SQL Server, this is cross-platform. And has a nice feature called Performance Investigator. And so I happen to know, I think it's this instance here, has this monitoring in place. And one of the things that we have implemented here is it's also the repository for Apex SQL. So it's being monitored and stored locally. And this was the area that I mentioned around, say, let's look at the last hour, and we can see the performance profile of this instance. And then we could try switching on some additional auditing using our audit system. And then what we could do is then compare that. So we could compare that same dimension with, say, the hour before, or I could do it with the day before, for example. Click compare and see whether we've introduced a performance overhead by introducing that additional monitoring. And I could do that at the instance level, or what I could do is say, look, this is the POS database that we're auditing. We've added some additional overhead there. Has it increased the CPU utilization? Looking at the same number of executions, has it increased some sort of overhead? And then again, we could do same dimension with the day before or the hour before, whatever you'd want to do, and then see at a database level whether we've introduced more overhead by doing that or not. Okay, so this sort of dimensional view, time view, is quite useful to be able to look at, say, the last 24 hours or whatever, and monitor what's happening. And in a similar way, if I increase the what I'm monitoring, that might put more of an overhead on where we're storing the data as well, in terms of whether there's any capacity in there. But that's a full monitoring solution, but it's the Performance Investigator feature that I was particularly important. So conscious that I'm probably running out of time, so I'll just minimize that back, and let's just go back to my deck a second. So let me just fast forward. So that was the bit there that I just wanted to reiterate, the performance side of things, being able to do that comparison and also dimension, how is it affecting a particular database by adding it, or how is it affecting the instance performance, are all things that we can help with. Okay. Okay, so I think that's me done. I think I'm all right for time. So if you want some more information or a trial, you can go to that link there. There's an FAQ folder link there, and the requirements for installing it are also on that link there. I don't think I've got any other questions. Hopefully you found that useful today. And if you've got anything after the event, you can obviously follow that up either through Prianto or through me, and I'm happy to help with that. Okay.
Thank you very much, Martin. If there is any question, please feel free asking or writing. And if you need, I don't know, a separate demonstration demo for your customers or your partners, or would you like to get a quotation, you can reach to Prianto, to us, and we are more than happy to provide you. Also, quick information, we will have the extraction after the webinar series ends, and then as was in our promotion, you can win a couple of, let's say, interesting gifts if you are joining 3 of our webinar series. Relating Quest, if you have requests for any kind of database technology, because we were focusing currently on more on the security compliance, but of course there are many different technologies from Quest covering the whole information management. And if you need more details about those technologies, you can anytime contacting us. It's all those solutions are supporting on-prem cloud and hybrid databases as it was presented, and having really good technologies for monitor, to secure, to optimize all your databases. If you need any kind of support, just let us know, and we will be here at your service with the vendor. Thank you very much for your attention. Any question, or we can follow up later?
I think we can follow up later. The question what came in we already shared. Maybe Martin, if you can follow up on this question later in the written form, that would be nice. Thank you very much.
Okay.
Thank you then. Thank you for your time.
Thank you very much.
Nice weekend.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.